Welcome, Wargamers, to the creepy, crawly caves of the mortal realms, because today we're going to be talking about the Gloomspite Gitz, specifically a Spider Fang story known as the Spidersiege, and this comes right out of the Gloomspite Gitz battle tome. Lord Ephegus of Nurgle establishes a vast and revolting dreadhold amidst the Panmerian jungles of Ghiran. Named the Rotted Hold, this disgusting fortress sinks its roots deep and begins to corrupt everything around it. Enraged at the slow corruption of their tribal territories, the shamans of no fewer than 16 different stock tribes mass their forces and assault the Rotted Hold. At first, Lord Ephegus and his Rotbringers are amused by the shrieking savages beyond their walls. But mirth quickly turns to shock as Skitterstrand spiders burst from the woven realm tunnels to snatch away Nurgle's faithful. One such beast devastates Lord Ephegus' personal guard, while another destroys the plague laboratory that was the heart of his armory. Worse follows as a dozen Arachnarok spiders march from the jungle and scale the fortress's immense walls, skitter mob after skitter mob of spider riders crawling around and over them amidst conjured scuttle tides before falling on the Rotbringers like a scrabbling tidal wave. Though thousands of grots and dozens of Arachnarok spiders are killed by flesh-rotting phages and hard-swung Rotbringer axes, in the end, the defenders are overrun. The surviving shamans work a mighty ritual over the fortress's rotten heart, killing it with the venom of the spider god and restoring the corrupted jungles to their primordial state. Alright, for those of you who are new to AOS or the faction, the Spider Fang are a subclass of grot that have formed a very symbiotic relationship with the giant spiders all over the realms. Okay, these are just naturally occurring spiders that are pretty much everywhere, and grots are like drawn to them. And they've even built this relationship, this symbiotic, relationship between species, up to the point where the arachnids factor into their personal religion and mythos. The idea is that a giant spider once bit Gorka Morka, their god of chaos, and absorbed some of his power. So venerating the spider is in a way worship to them of Gorka Morka as well, since that beast, the spider itself, was just a vessel for the blessings of their god. From spiders, they get food, they use them as beasts of burden, as cavalry and stuff like that, toxins, poisons, and so on. And these tribes, or war bands of Spiderfang, are known as stalker tribes, as they were mentioned in the story. Now, I've covered them in more detail, specifically their whole religious belief, in my other videos regarding the Gloomspite Gitz, which you can find the playlist in the description down below. But there's actually a lot more going on here. In fact, the real reason I picked this story was to talk about two unique things. One is that we rarely see Nurgle versus Greenskins. I'm not sure why, but it is there. And secondly, we rarely see the Gloomspite Gitz doing a full-blown siege, at least on this level, with an emphasis on Spider Fang units. And one last thing I actually just thought of as I was recording this is that, honestly, most of the stories we have of fighting Nurgle in Ghiran are all Sylvaneth. We don't have a whole lot of some other random species that doesn't care about Alariel is fighting Nurgle in Ghiran. There's a lot of imagery and stuff like that, regarding purification that's strictly regarded to Alariel. Now, one thing that this story really brought to the forefront is that Nurgle destroys so much more than armies. Right? One thing that really highlights for me is how much an effect the maggotkin have on their surrounding environment. And that's something I wish was touched on more. A lot of these, it'll kind of give a one sentence mention that Nurgle's kind of making things gross. But the idea is so many times these stories are about the maggotkin army itself, but these are warriors that are essentially using biological warfare just as much, if not more so, than sword and axe. And this story highlights that, because this Nurgle champion has this big dread fort, which means, he's been around since before the first General's Handbook and dropped a ton of money on terrain like the rest of us, but nothing he is actively doing is antagonizing the Gloomspite Gitz. He is not marshaling to meet them in battle, he's just chilling. But the sheer corruptive nature of his presence in this fort is destroying the natural environments of at least 16 stalker tribes. That's 16 that joined together, but it could have been affecting many more, like much more area that just didn't have a stalker tribe in it. And so this fortress is a huge blight on the ecosystem, not just a threat of a looming army in your midst. And the importance of that can't be overstated, right? Because grots, to me, are up there with like the Lumineth Realm Lords and the Sylvaneth in terms of the natural environment of their home being essential to them as a faction. Grots have evolved to thrive in the dank caves in the mortal realms, but also, or in the Spiderfang's case, thick forests. It's their home, it's where they find sustenance, it's the core of their religion and their mythos, everything. And you get a glimpse of how serious this is simply by the fact that they team up, right? Because it takes a whole heck of a lot to get grots on the same page, and certainly 16 of them. It's ridiculous, but this ecological disaster arouses the wrath of all these tribe leaders, and that's nuts. And while the Spiderfang do seem to be a bit better about working together, in terms of like them versus Moonclan Grots, this is still a rather large achievement for them in their cooperation skills. And what I love about this story is it does a great job of showing us, the reader, what it's like for the Spiderfang to go to war, right? It's a small subset of the Gloomspite Gitz, but what does total war mean to them? Right, and they fight in the most grot way possible, using tricks and deception. And here's what I mean. The army does the thing you should never do, which is show your hand, right? Big teeming mobs of Spiderfang roll up, and they're screaming and cussing at the maggotkin, and these Nurgle forces are all amused because it looks like a bunch of cute little dudes sitting on bugs, waving their sticks around, right? They're so adorable, they'll make great, fertilizer, whatever Nurgle does with dead grots. But all of that does is simply pull their attention to outside the walls and lulls them into a false sense of security. Because underground, the real assault is coming. A small fleet, I don't really know what to call this, of Skitterstrand spiders with no riders, so if you're looking at the Arachnarok kit, the one that doesn't have anything on its back, pop up from the ground. And they pretty much say, "That's a mighty fine hell fort you bought there. It'd be a shame if someone were to go right past it." And they bust up from inside the walls of the fort itself. And these creatures, as I pointed out in their lore bits within the Gloomspite playlist, are intelligent, right? This is not like unleashing a wild beast, something like the Iron Jaws would do. They would just kind of like let a boar go or something crazy like that. Not at all. The Skitterstrand spiders have their own like predatory cunning. And they burst up and they snipe out mobs of maggotkin, assaulting the personal guard of the leader here as well. And so now all the eyes that were looking outward and laughing turn inward to the interior of the fort, which makes perfect sense. And it's at that point that the Arachnaroks appear in the distance. These are massive spiders on par with the Skitterstrand that act as the living siege weapons of the Gloomspite Gitz. And now there they are, boom, just outside your doorstep, along with thousands of spider riders crawling up the wall. And I can see this on the table because if you don't know, spider riding units can traverse terrain as if they could fly, which just makes it phenomenal to try and kind of recreate this on the tabletop. But imagine this like black tidal wave of spiders just washing up the wall. And at this point for the maggotkin, it's like, what do you do, right? How do you assess what the biggest threat is here? The walls are all but lost already. The Gloomspite Gitz heavy hitters are just now showing up. And if you move inwards to, say, secure the courtyard or an Inner Sanctum, whatever, and set up defenses where the walls are breached, you get eaten by Skitterstrands. It's just a mess. And like the book says, thousands of grots die and dozens of Arachnarots. And let's be honest, the Arachnaroks are the bigger loss here, right? Nobody cares about the grots dying. That's like par for the course. But the spiders, not the spiders. But after it all, the fort is taken, and the venom of the Spiderfang is able to twist and poison the Nurgle corruption within the area. They literally make something so toxic that the microbial life can't exist, and they just kill it from the source, which is a power that I don't think is brought up nearly enough. Actually, I'm going to talk about it more and why is this cool, but I'm going to hear a quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll dive into that. Hey Wargamers, Doug here, and I want to talk to you about a crazy awesome book that you can use to create some exciting locations for your heroes and your stories. Spectacular Settlements breaks down how to build the most engaging locations, and while it's certainly designed for role-playing games, and it is role-playing game agnostic, you can use it in any one that you want, from D&D to Soulbound, it also has a lot of really great uses for Age of Sigmar. Whether you're designing a bastion of chaos, a city of Sigmar, or just a rugged settlement of destruction out in the wastes, this book walks you through how to design a city, and I mean design a city with its culture, its history, its physical appearance all in mind. There's so much inside this book to help you really flesh out all of the minor details of your city and really bring it to life. It's a fabulous tool for creating unique environments for both your narrative as well as any games that you might be bringing players into. So if you want some dazzling locations for your City of Sigmar, your Soulbound crew, or any other role-playing game, check out Spectacular Settlements in the description down below. Now back to the show. Okay, so why is this story so cool, the Spidersiege? Well, one thing I touched on right before going to break is that the idea, like this power that the Gloomspite Gitz apparently have to undo chaos corruption, or at least, poison Nurgle's rot, is something that's not nearly brought up enough, because they could be, what we learned from this, another faction that is trying to get Nurgle out of Guiran, and that makes for a compelling narrative to me, because quite frankly I'm a little bit bored with just the whole Sylvaneth versus Nurgle stuff. Like, I mean, it's a perfect fight, they're identical armies, it's just that it's been 6 years of basically the same narrative. Not a whole lot happens in Guiran that isn't involving those two forces, but other things do live there, right? And so this is one of like a third party being like, I am so sick of everything falling apart and being rotten that we're going to fix this. And I love that. I want more of that. We get lore bits here and there about how different factions can purge like chaos corruption from their area, right? Where it's not just killing the army, but literally healing the landscape. In this case, just killing off the infection, which is what they did. There's no indication that they made like life bloom, if they just killed the Nurgle rot. But honestly, that's enough. This is basically a Captain Planet version of Grots, right? It highlights the effects of Nurgle's presence, if it's not his actual military might. And it's a side of both factions we don't see enough, right? The Gloomspite Gitz needing to protect the environments that make their lives possible, but then also the corrupting effects of Nurgle just being in an area. He doesn't have to do anything, just has to have some people there. And so I want to see Spiderfang do more in the lore, because so much of their army feels, I don't want to say tacked on, but I feel like not enough is done to make them unique within the story arcs, right? But this is a case where it warrants some real attention. They went to war and had a different objective than most other Gloomspite Gitz armies, right? Where MoonClan are like fighting and raiding for bottles, or just because like the bad moon's above them. This was a very practical, like, hey, we need to do something because crap's getting real around this area and all of us are ticked off, right? All 16 stock tribes. Like that is a very practical, understandable, especially for Grots, reason to go to war, and they did it in a unique way where they used, basically they drew the attention one way and then back the other way and then back the other way again, and it's just crazy. You have your little tribal guys screaming, draw attention outside the wall, skitter strands inside the wall, and then by the time they look back outside the wall, boom, you have your Arachnaroks. So a lot of it is just super crazy. I love the way that they went to battle. It would be a wonderful siege game, to be honest with you. It doesn't need to be like, 10k points or anything. Just have an attacker and defender mission with some flavor rules in there, and you can just go nuts. Maybe just have like, hey, if you're on the floor within the fort, you take some mortal wounds here or there to kind of like replicate the skitter strand popping up. So as far as like my final thoughts go, I love the story for that exact reason. It just takes, a snippet that we've kind of, quite frankly, had on rerun for a while of just Nurgle messing up Guiran, but it adds a lot of interesting new elements, right, that the Grots care deeply as well, just as much as the Sylvaneth, because it's their home too. They come together, they fight off Nurgle, but specifically that they do it in a Spiderfang-centric way. So for all those reasons, to me, it's like the perfect story to highlight what makes a sub-faction of an army so cool. It just, They go to war differently, they have different priorities, they work together better. I love it. So friends, let me know your thoughts in the description down below. Was there any part of the story that really stood out to you, and what would you like to see more of? Also, if you're a Spider-Fang player, like, let me know, just because I just want to know you exist. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and listening today, and I'll catch you next time in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming.